And welcome back to the show. Today we have Chalmers and Lavette Coney, and they have started a new show on Wellesley Media called Race in Point. And we're going to discuss the show and how it's going and some of the key points that they're trying to make on their show, on our show today. So let me ask you, starting off, why Race in Point?
Because we don't have opportunities to talk about it, right? And I don't think there is any show out there that's actually doing that kind of work.
Yeah, and I think you two also co-led a workshop about white people challenging racism.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that was the most recent one, I believe.
It's ongoing.
It's ongoing.
So we've been, I've been a facilitator for white people challenging racism for over about 10 years. Right. And so usually we do about 3 or 4 a year. Mm-hmm. They're 5-week workshops, and it is an opportunity to sort of engage. Mm-hmm. And obviously it's open to everyone. So the title is White People Challenging Racism. Right. However, obviously everyone is included. Mm-hmm. We do a cross-racial facilitation and try to get opportunities to talk about race. And then, Lavette and I have been doing this work together for years, and engaging teachers, engaging parents, and engaging professors, and corporations. And like she said, we just really thought about how do we model, having a conversation about race, because it's messy. It really is messy, and it's complicated, and it's, I love it. It's fun, right? But not everybody thinks that. Right. So we wanted to sort of show that it can be fun at the same time being messy. And so this opportunity with Wellesley Access Media to live in the community, and you can create your own show. Right. That's been awesome.
And I also think when we call it White People Challenging Racism, it is open to everyone. However, white people have this opportunity where they don't have to think about race every day, right? So, and if you don't bring it to the forefront, the likelihood of them talking about it or discussing it or even hearing about it is very slim.
Right.
So.
And are there similar touch points between the workshops and the show? Do you discuss similar things? Does one come out of the other?
The workshop is very structured and it's very dense, and it's lengthy. So and people come out of it because for the amount of money, it's only $85, but it's 5 weeks.
It's a lot of information.
But it's intense. It is a lot of work, a lot of internal work, and then also an action plan they have to develop. So.
Wow. Well,
so different from the show.
Right. Yeah. And so what are some of the crossover points that you guys talk about in the show that you find are important?
I'm trying to remember. I feel like we've done 4 or 5 shows and trying to remember the guests. And so, we've wanted to reach out to our first guest actually was a woman of African descent who works at Mass Bay Community College, who's also on the board for Wilder Wellesley Soul. And have her perspective, as a woman of color, and being able to, talk about race in a format that we really don't have a structure. We really don't have any expectations. We don't really have any guidelines. Right. We sort of invite people to come and talk about what's on your mind. Right. Race in Point was created from case in point, right? That, sometimes there's so many things that are happening in our lives that that happen, and case in point, what is happening right now, and when do you take the time to actually unpack it and have time to just have a discourse. So I think our shows, I hope that people like them. They're honest, they're authentic. We don't really think too much. We just really speak for our truth.
So do people approach you and say, "Oh, I saw your show, and then here are my comments," or "Here's what I think about what you said"?
Not yet. It's early still. It's early still. But I also think that what we try to do with the show as well is look at race, because we're in a race-based society. A lot of people don't see it that way, but we are. I mean, that's how this country was founded, right? So everything that we do, even though some people may say, wait a minute, why does it always have to be about race?
Right.
Because it is.
Right.
So that's what we try to bring out in this show as well, and look at different things that are going on in the media and how we can like show how race shows up.
Right. So it's an interesting concept, the concept of race, because I think there have been several recent articles. They're not only in journals like Scientific American or National Geographic, but there's Harvard professors and professors who work at the National Institutes of Health, like the ones who did the Human Genome Project and mapped out the entire human genome. And they've basically come out and said that there's no such thing. There's no such scientific basis for race.
Right.
There's only one race, and that's the human race, because we all have 23 base pairs.
Right.
And as a race, we're 100,000 years old, and there isn't enough time for that kind of diversity to happen to qualify people to be different races.
Right. And we've been mixing with each other for 100,000
and,
years.
and the human spread is so wide that, and we're so young as a population.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So do you think, where are we now in terms of race, or people understanding what race really is? Or
it surprises me how many people do not know that race is a social construct.
Right.
That it is a myth that biologically we are 99.9% the same. And, sometimes I'll just drop that in a conversation. Sometimes I'll be like, God, did you know this? Like, wow, I didn't know this. And just to see people's reaction.
Right.
And it was so funny because I actually did it yesterday, right? I was at work and there was fruit flies. And we were like, there's no bananas. Like, why are there fruit flies? And so we're just sitting there, trying to kill them. And I said, do you know that there's 11 times more genetic variation in a fruit fly than there is in the human species?
Right.
And people were like, what? Yeah. And I said, yeah. They're like, where did you learn that? And I said, no, it's true, right? So since they've understand the genome, and I said, there's twice as much genetic variation in penguins than there is human beings, even though we look different.
Right, that's the...
And being able to bring it up like that, and just, you have a fruit fly, and then you just killed it, and you're like, oh my God, I just killed all that genetic diversity. I felt so bad after. But being able to bring that sort of awareness and knowledge into everyday conversation, I think is really important, where you get people to, calm down a little bit and realize it's going to be okay. That, I think a lot of times people get upset that they don't know that. They're like, how could I not know that? I remember a biologist. Remember that biologist in our class?
Cambridge, yep.
That man, we blew his mind.
He must have been in his
60s, at least. Biologist, like studied higher ed biology, PhD, and he literally could not speak for a few. Like, he did not understand how he could get through his education, be a biologist studying on the shores in marine biology, and not understand that race is not real.
Racism is real.
Right.
But race isn't, right? And that was hard for him to grapple with.
Right. Right.
So that says how insidious it is, right?
Right. Exactly. So, and who's your next guest coming up? Do you have someone?
And not quite yet.
Not quite yet.
We have some.
But we have some people in mind. But we have to work out the schedule.
Right.
Yeah.
We've asked them already, but it's the schedule. Trying to figure out the schedule, make sure it fits for all three, right? The producer and as well as the speaker and both of us.
Right. And so, what is your next topic that you're going to cover? What's upcoming?
Well, we want to see what's in the news and then use that, something current, but also too just talk to them about what they're doing and about their and how race shows up for them in their lives. So those are the things that we'll talk about.
Right. So give us some examples of how racism shows up in everyday life.
When you talk about microaggressions, microaggressions are part of that too, right? It's just a symptom of racism, right? So microaggressions show up every time, all the time.
Right. What is that?
So for me, a microaggression is like a little bee sting, or little cuts all throughout the day of things that people say that maybe they don't intend to say, but because of them not being thoughtful and not having, and and not having the information about race, that they say, for example, wow, you speak so fluently, or where are you from?
Right.
You know, things like that.
Right.
You know, those are like microaggressions.
Right. Or, making assumptions
But
based on how you look without asking the question. Right.
Well, and it's one of those things that, you know, I think Robin DiAngelo, who wrote White Fragility, talks about, you know, the fish in water, right? And I think there's a great comic, or, you know, where it has two fish, and one fish swimming by going, how's the water? And the other fish is like,
what water?
What water? Right? Like, we're in water. And so that's what it feels like when someone says, you know, tell me about how race shows up. And it's like, you're just so overwhelmed. You're like, wait, tell me when race doesn't show up. Right? I mean, I think about it as a white woman, how I am, it's like I'm given this I'm just validated. No matter what space I walk in.
You don't have to work for it.
I don't, it's just expected that I could walk into any store, any business, and totally be welcome and expected to be there. Right? So I could literally walk into, you know, it's almost like, you know, how remember Julia Roberts with, you know, Pretty Woman, walked into that store and they looked at her and made a judgment that she didn't have the kind of money that, you know, that would be appropriate for her to be in that store.
Right.
Yeah, big mistake. I love when she says that, right? But again, how classism shows up, right? And we make judgments. But even with classism, I can still dress in ratty, you know, t-shirt or sweatshirt and sweatpants and walk into, you know, any of the stores in downtown Wellesley. And, you know, I might get a glance, but I'm certainly not going to have the police called, which may or may not happen to a woman of color and or a black woman or a black man. And so those are the kind of things that sometimes you don't even think about. You know, I was just talking to a woman over the high holidays, and Rabbi Sissenswine, his, you know, sermon, if you call it that, was about white privilege. And and this is high holiday, like this is massive amounts of people in the synagogue, and talked about that he was driving with his daughter and down West Newton and did a funny U-turn kind of a thing, and the police, you know, pulled him over, and in a, you know, officer, I'm so sorry, like, you know, that was totally, I shouldn't have done that, and I have my daughter in the car, and, you know, and he said, you know, no worries, don't do that again, kind of a thing, gave him a warning, if I remember the story correctly. And his daughter turned to him and goes, Dad, you know that's white privilege right there, right? Because that wouldn't have happened to you if you were a person of color. And so he was like, wow, you know, you don't realize sometimes, you know, the access and the opportunity that you have just because of your lack of melanin.
And the fact that we've been conditioned and socialized, right? I mean, all of these black men and also women who are getting shot by the police, and you ask yourself, how is that possible? And they did some research and they talked to the police afterwards and they said, why did you do it? And they said, I don't know. There's something in the subconscious, right? Some people likened it to like when you see you know, a spider or snake, like you just want to, you know, because of the social conditioning that they've been given. So it runs really deep. So you're talking about, you know, psychology, right? And also socialization. But there's this really great book, and it's called, I think, Grandmother's Hands. And he talks about white bodies, black bodies, and blue bodies. And he goes back and looks at the history and how all of that informs you, and talks about epigenetics and how that changes, you know, your genome and also that what happened. I think they did a study with children who were malnutrition, and then they also did Holocaust survivors, and then obviously that relates to even slavery, right? And people who were enslaved and how that has been passed down. And you also have DeGrew's book about post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? So all of these things, and you pull, there's so much information out there that it's,
Right.
it's really sad the amount of trauma that people are incurring, both on all sides, on
Right.
all throughout.
Right.
And so the blue bodies are about the police and their own culture and how they're taught not to even like feel anything. If you have a police officer, he said, who works only in the night shift, and he only sees the bad of human, the bad side of human beings, right? Because
Right.
at that time of night,
Right.
you're seeing a lot of, and then you
Right.
just, instead of instinctively, we're supposed to like either close our eyes when we see someone with a gash or see
Right.
something like really hideous,
Right.
but they're
Yeah.
made to look at it,
Right.
and they constantly see that, and they just become numb
Right.
to it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
Wow, those are some interesting and scary points that you raised, right?
But it is all true, and I think that it's important that we do keep our eyes open, right? I think that it's only made me a better person, more empathetic. I think that the system that we live in, the white supremacy system, and having access and opportunity at the expense of others, and not thinking of that, and not realizing that, or choosing to not look at it,
Right.
or choosing to deny it, that hurts me. That hurts my soul. That hurts who I am
Right.
internally. And there is trauma there, especially if I am, creating these microaggressions or creating this trauma for another human being. And then I'm experiencing that. Not only have I lost that connection to another human being by saying something that was not lacked, rich in empathy, right? Or understanding. That also hurts me. And so there's a lot that we lose in
Your
this
humanity.
system. Yeah.
at its core.
And that's what we're hoping, is that Race in Point, again, is trying to, share really our lived experiences, and especially as friends, across race. It's complicated, but I just find that it is really, it's a beautiful thing, actually, when we can connect. When you think about all the places that you've lived in your life and experiences that you've had, and the people that you can walk into probably a room with anyone and connect at some point, because you have that experience. You've been through different cultures, foods, languages, religions, all of that. And you too.
That's enriching.
It is. It very much so is. And it also gives you a greater sense of yourself, right? Like, I feel that, and again, sometimes I wonder if it's a privilege that I can walk into any space, but I can walk into any space of difference. So I don't mean that I can walk into the space of white people. Yes, I know that. But I feel like I could walk into a space no matter what and be comfortable, because I understand who I am, but then I understand that we are all human beings, and express our culture, and I respect that, right? I don't like the word tolerance and all of that. I don't use that. So no, I never want to tolerate anybody. But I feel like I hope that how I come across would be very inviting and welcoming, that I wouldn't be afraid. I think that there's people that are afraid to talk to people of difference because they might have an accent. You might not understand them. Or you might say something wrong, right? Yes, that is probably true, right? We probably will say something wrong. And that's why you say sorry, right? Or teach me. I'm open, and I apologize. Please help me to understand,
I think you made a really good point in terms of knowing yourself, right? When you know yourself, you're more apt to go outside of your comfort zone. So that's a part of the insidiousness of racism, is that you don't want to be uncomfortable, so therefore you don't go there.
Right. So you stick to rules that have been
Set up for
handed
you.
down to you by somebody else to follow, because. Right.
I went to a workshop recently, and they talked about board positions and how different people on the board, they want more diversity, but they don't have access to diversity, right? So he said that he gives them this exercise that he has them do, and he has them look at their circle of friends. Who are your circle of friends? And then when you find out who your circle of friends are, then ask yourself, how is it that you can create and bring diversity to the board if you have no diversity in your circle?
Right.
So that's really important, like knowing yourself and being, and that's why the racial identity development work is so important, right? People can know where they are from point A to point B, because there are different phases as to knowing who you are in order for you to be able to deal with others.
And white people have racial
They do.
identity
They do.
development. Like I think
Helms,
a lot of
I think Helms is.
it is, yeah. Janet Helms. And white people a lot of times think, well, that race thing, well, that's other people. That's
So it
not
doesn't
white
apply
people.
to white
people.
people.
Don't have a race, right? We're just normal.
I think because they opted in for being white opposed to Greek or Italian American or whatever have you. They said, okay, we're going to let that go in order to have this privilege of whiteness.
Which is really, in my honest opinion, in my family, and I know I've talked to you about this before, is that, you know, my family immigrating to this country, you know, 2 generations, 3 generations, and giving up their culture, giving up their language. Both my parents do not speak Italian. They don't speak Portuguese. They know really nothing about their culture. And they didn't pass down anything. My grandparents, they spoke the language in the house, but did not speak the language outside of the house. Did not, and really never taught it to their, you know, 6 children. Right. And it's a big loss. It's a real loss. And I think that's why sometimes we, as white people, you know, generalizing, but we feel like, for me, I don't even know who I am. You know, people say, oh, well, you look Italian. Okay, that's great. What does that mean? Like, I don't even know where I'm from. I don't even know.
Same, look at me. I mean, some people say I look like I'm from northern Nigeria, and then some people say I look like I'm from Ethiopia. I mean, it's like, I don't know. And why should I have to pay for a DNA test? You know what I mean? I don't know.
Right. And you shouldn't have had to.
Right. So what, let me ask each of you this question. What got each of you interested into this advocacy?
I believe it's part of everybody's work, right? I think a lot of people say, "Oh, that's great, nice hobby you have." I'm all for the whales.
Right.
Like, no, we all should be doing this work, because if we're all doing this work, we wouldn't have to even talk about this anymore, right? Because it's hard work, it's human work, and everyone should be doing it. And I started really early when I was in high school. I wrote an essay. And I was looking at African Americans, because they always would say black. And I said, well, black, well, wait a minute. What culturally, because I was taking anthropology courses when I was in high school. And I said, no, let's look at this culturally and also where our ancestors are from. I started there, and then I have to tell you, my evolution in looking at this work, I always felt like it was our work, people of color's work to do. And then later I saw the research and information where even white people were saying, no, this is a white disease. White people should be doing this work. And so then that's when I geared over there. And then it's just been really, it's been a lot of work, but I feel that it's necessary. And it's sad that I'm typecast, because people think, oh, she always talks about race. You know, and it's, we all should be talking about it, because if we did, then we would feel comfortable about it, and we can dismantle it.
Right.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. You know, it's one of those tough questions, I think, to think about, because on the one hand, as a white person, you have to think about how you had no idea that race and racism was a thing, and that you didn't, you know, growing up in Wellesley and not ever understanding why Boston students were bused from Boston into Wellesley, and no one ever told you what that was and why, and you never asked why these black and brown children are in your school when everyone else looks like you. Right. And so that's you know, it's part of the White People Challenging Racism, is we ask people to do a journey and really think about your racial identity development and when you really sort of understood race. And for a lot of white people, when you ask them to think about when they understood about race that exists, it's very much usually when they met their first black person, right? That somehow that's when race came into your life. When you think about it, race came into your life the minute you were born in the zip code that you were born. That's where race shows up, is in your zip code. And so, as you understand about redlining and you understand about how communities and the government obviously segregated America by race, it's overwhelming. And so that, for me, it was overwhelming. And it was one of those things that I denied for a long time, because, you're like, oh, I'm not racist and I don't think those things. And, I didn't even know what I didn't know. Like, I didn't even know what I wasn't supposed to be thinking or what I should have been thinking.
Right.
And so,
because it wasn't a topic of conversation at all.
Never.
No teacher brought it up. No students brought it up.
And the more we do
Not
this
till college.
Right.
And the more we do this work, we find that so many people still don't know.
Right.
So we feel that we have to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's not like buying milk. It's not an immediate necessity. So it becomes pushed to the background.
Well, but that's the thing. Not that we should be drinking milk, but it is.
Right.
But it is a necessity.
Right.
That's the thing, is that we
But they
really
realize it.
know. And that's what we're hoping, is that, Race in Point can be really an opportunity to be vulnerable, be courageous, come and talk with us. We'd love to have you on the show.
Yeah. I'm
right?
happy
Yeah.
anytime. Let me know.
Again, we all have lived experiences around race and how it shows up in our lives, and I think that it's going to deepen your relationships. I think that it's deepened my relationships and allowed me to connect to people on a broader, deeper level than if I couldn't go there.
So how did race come to you? The forefront of your consciousness in college?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely, it's always interesting. My children always say, Mom, are you just like this because of us? So, I've been married to a man who identifies as Black for 30 years. And so, but I was a social worker, like before that, meaning, when I started college, it always interested me of difference and society, and I want to study sociology, because the very few friends of color that I had growing up, I didn't understand why our relationships never stayed tight, and I never understood the nuances and again, the slight comments, right, that people would make, or the differences in class, or access and opportunity. And it just never made sense to me. And so I began taking those sociology courses and having my first Black professor and watching, I'll remember, we watched Roots, we watched Eyes on the Prize, and it literally, again, started to open for me. And then, 3 or 4 years later, I met my husband. And it wasn't a thing for me, meaning it never, naively, never entered my mind as you're dating a person of a different race or a Black man. Like, it just never entered my mind. I did not know, right? I did not know the experiences. I had never, I didn't really know many Black men. I knew some Black women, but not really any Black men. And it wasn't until we started dating where people were like, wow, you're dating a Black guy? I'm like, yeah, what? And having that sort of conversation and people's reaction, they'd be like, oh, no, I don't mind. Like, I don't care, but I'm just saying.
Right.
And I'm like, but what are you saying?
And why should you make the comment that you don't care? Like, why is it a thing?
Right, exactly. Right. Why should I even have to, right. And I was very, very naive. But I would, and I'm going to be totally honest, which this is really hard, is that it wasn't until that it really hit me in the face when I was visiting my husband's family in Texas, and visiting my father-in-law. Wasn't my father-in-law at the time, but obviously my boyfriend's father, who was a preacher, and we were in his church, all Black church, and I was the only white person in the church. And I remember, I can remember it. I was sitting in the pew and turning around and seeing all these Black people behind me, and these elders and these amazing people. and realizing that internally I thought I was better than they were.
In terms of socioeconomics,
I
or
don't know. I just was better. And I really couldn't articulate that at the time, but I was like, Michelle, what are you thinking?
or why are you feeling what you feel? Like,
Yes,
where does
like,
that come
how
from?
in the world can you
Right.
look at, seriously?
Right.
Like, it was so, like you said, like it just comes from,
Right.
like, inside, from wherever. Like, it's almost like this, you're better. It's like this mantra that goes through your head. And I was like, no, what? No, we are shutting this down right now. And that has really been my, and here I am telling everyone this, but sorry, I feel like it's important that I
they can
have to be
relate. Maybe
honest.
Yeah,
some people
and,
can relate.
that's
I
what
mean-
makes these kinds of dialogues important, because these are such personal conversations.
But it's hard. It might
It
be
is
hard,
hard.
for people of color to hear, because
No, it's not actually, because I remember someone even saying to me that they were upset that I owned a home. They felt that I don't own a home. I'm white, and you own a home, and you're black. That's not right. And I had that person say that to me.
Oh, wow.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And it's because of racism. I mean,
It
people.
is. And that's when I realized that there's something inside of me that is controlling me, and I don't like that.
Right.
He ain't gonna do that.
And
And so I've been fighting against it ever
And people
since.
don't realize the layers, right? This it's ideological. It's on the ideological. Like, most people think racism is just interpersonal.
Right.
Right,
but-
if I just don't like you, or you,
Yeah, but it's way more than that, right? It's ideological, it's institutional, and it's also internal, because you can internalize your perceived inferiority or your perceived superiority,
Right.
right?
And there's always two choices to make. If you recognize it, do you stay with it, or do you do something
That's
to
right.
You
to
have-
challenge
alter
it
that?
have
and
to.
alter it.
Right.
And that's, and that really is, that's huge. I think that's huge. And I think that if we're more mindful of it, then we'll catch ourselves when we
Are doing
clutch
the
our
work.
purse.
And when you're doing the work, you recognize it, right?
Yes.
You have to
Oh,
actually
all
do
day
your
long.
own studying. You have to read. You have to watch videos. You have to talk to people
Yep.
who look like you about these. Your allies. Your people who can actually help you through it.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you walk down the street and you don't move when a person of color is walking towards you, or you clutch your purse if you see a black person, or lock your door, like, bring that to your conscious and understand why
Ask
that's
why.
happening. And then how are you going to challenge that if that's not okay with you? Right? I mean, if it's okay with you,
That's a whole nother story.
that's a
Right,
whole, right.
right.
But
Right.
but if you understand, like, wait, what am I doing?
Right.
And why
Or-
am I
right.
doing that?
Why do I feel that way?
Yes.
So even with white supremacy, it affects people of color, right? So I've had thoughts too, where I saw an Asian person, and I would say, "Oh, where are they from? I wonder what language they speak. Why is that important, right?" Or like, if I see an African American man, I might like really be careful. Like, where do I get that from? The media, and it's just. I'm just inundated with things like that. And so that's what I was talking about, the parent and being intentional.
Yes.
Because you know your child is going to go out there and they're going to be seeing and interacting with an environment that you know is bad for them.
Right.
So and that's going to be internalized, right? And it's going to come out somehow,
Right.
right?
So, and how do you mediate that? How do you?
That's why you have to do the work.
It's hard to say,
Constantly
well,
do the
I'm
work.
sending you out into the world and it's a bad place.
Yes.
And don't internalize it. I
Right.
mean, how do you navigate that
well,
space?
that's raising
Right.
black boys, as
Right.
we've done for the last 22
Right.
years. Like,
Right.
like this has been since my children were 4 and 5 years old. I mean, this is a conversation that, as a white woman raising children of color, this is different for a white person to be saying this. But in terms, because most cases would have white kids, but my kids of color and boys of color. You don't have that luxury of not having these conversations.
Conversations, right.
My children brought these conversations to me. I had to have these conversations. I had to be able to protect them. I had to be able to fill them up with, again, understanding that this is not about you, right? When my son came home from first grade and his teacher had said, if it wasn't for Martin Luther King, Marcus couldn't come to this school. And my son internalized immediately, there's something wrong
Yeah.
with you. Because if you're not allowed to come to school, you must have done something wrong. You are wrong. And so that was when my son showed up that day after I picked him up from school, and I was so excited to see him.
Right.
And he's like, Mommy, what is wrong with me? And from that day forward, I have told him every day, there is nothing wrong with you. And Mommy is going to have a conversation with the person that just had that conversation with you, because they were wrong.
Right.
And they don't see you.
Yeah, they don't realize what they say, like the words
That's
and the impact that it
That's
makes
right.
when you make certain assumptions and you say things.
And they have damaged my child
Right.
in that
Intent.
one sentence
Right.
for the rest of his life.
Intent versus impact, right? I mean, a lot of these teachers, they're walking around and it's like a weapon, a dangerous weapon, you know, that they're doing things to children, and whether they recognize it or not, that's why they need to be doing the internal work and doing this work, right?
But it's the ideology and the systems, right?
Yeah.
The institutions that says, well, we don't have the time to do professional development. We don't have the money to do professional development. And then you have these teachers who are so overworked already.
already.
Right.
And then not have, again, to go out to be able to do this on your own. And there are amazing teachers that are doing it, right?
So it should be part of the curriculum like math and science or English.
Absolutely.
It should be professional development or diversity education.
So if you look at institutions, education is part of the institution, right? So you
Right.
have, you know, medicine, you have law, everyone would have to do it
Right.
in order for this to get handled, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of work for you two ladies.
There is,
Still-
but that's the
still
thing.
pending.
We want other people
We
to
need
take on
help.
the burden
Right,
too,
right.
because it's everyone's work. It's not just our
Right,
work.
Right.
But,
Yeah, and even just saying the word work, like,
Right.
it really isn't work.
It's education.
Yeah, it's really enriching. It is soul fulfilling. You know, when, you know, again, when you can have these conversations, and for me, you know, for my children of color to be able to come and talk to me about these issues and about these things that, again, they still, you know, my baby son will say, you know, Mom, I wish that you could walk my shoes. I wish you could understand what it's like.
Right.
And I cannot.
Right.
I will never be able to. But I will try so hard, again, to again understand from the perspective that I have, and fulfilling my humanity and my soul to be able to connect. And to me, it has been an amazing gift, and I wouldn't change anything as horrific as some of it has been,
Right.
for sure.
So for my sons, you know, I intentionally wanted to make sure they had friends who looked like them, because they went to a private school, and everyone, they were like sought after, because, you know, there are a few boys of African descent, so they want play dates. So even something as simple as play dates. I just got finished listening to a podcast, and I'm like, yeah, that's right, you know, because my children are older now, and I'm like, problematic, you know, especially when your child is one of the only black children in the classroom, and everybody wants them to come to their house or go to their parties, but then you have to deal with the microaggressions of the parents,
Right.
and the ignorance of the parents,
Right.
and then the things that they even give you as presents. And it's so multi-layered, even something as simple as a play date.
And give you as presents?
Yeah.
They would give presents, and certain presents, like for example, give you a white doll baby to your child.
Right.
You know what I mean? For
Right,
their
right,
birthday, or
right.
come to the birthday, and then the expectations you should drop off. But in reality, you see all these other parents that are still there. But then you say to yourself, "Do I stay? Everybody else is staying, but do I want to deal with that? All the micro and macroaggressions that I'm going to deal with from those parents?"
Right.
You know, rather. And on the podcast, some people said, "I don't even do play dates with white people. I just don't. It's just too much trauma."
That's work.
It is.
it's work.
And so, and again, that is so deep, and probably something that we should talk about on the show, because then
Should have
racism is so
Show
horrific.
special play dates.
There you go, play
Quotes.
dates. Because
Right.
because then if you know, if a white person asks a person of color for a play date and they say no, oh, see,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
Right.
I wonder why, or
So
you
then,
know,
yeah.
there must be something behind that, when there really is, but they're not having that conversation to really understand. And again, it might not happen with that one particular family. That might happen, but again, you can't sometimes take that risk
Right.
for your child and for
So
you, because it
That's
takes
what-
you
right.
so. It takes you. I mean. You have to build your child up 10 times over
Right.
when things happen.
So human interactions themselves are so complicated, and then this adds like a times 10 level of complexity. because of ignorance, really.
Yes.
So
And we still have to change it, right? We still have to keep fighting for integrated neighborhoods and opportunities to connect across difference. Like, we can't shy away from it. You know, I think we still need to engage with it. I hope that's, you know, because I hope that we don't end up.
It's interesting that you say that, because I just came from a conference where an educator was actually proposing that black boys in particular, he had this great presentation where he had all of these African American males like W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was an actual Renaissance man. He sang opera, he was a football player, he spoke 6 languages, and he says, this is considered black excellence and black genius. Where do we see that today? We don't see that. Like, boys, when they play sports, they're not going to say, okay, I'm going to go out, you know, for theater, and I'm going to like make sure I'm really good at all these different languages. He says you don't get that anymore, because that was during segregation, where when black women were teaching these black boys. Whereas now, he says these public schools are designed and set up to do what they're doing. They don't bring about black excellence and greatness. And he says white women don't have the capacity, and they don't have
The belief.
they don't, and also the racial identity development. They don't even know who they are, and if they don't know who they are, and they're dealing with these children of color, black boys in particular, who are way ahead of them in their identity development and know who they are.
Right.
And then they're trying to, where's the connection? Because we know when you educate a child, you need to have those connections. And you can't even make that connection because you can't understand what that child's going through, because you don't even know who you are.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this is a very fascinating and it's unendingly fascinating.
It is. It is. It is.
I could have this conversation for another 2 hours, because these are just such very fundamental and deep concepts.
You are correct.
So it's interesting, and please share with us like any thoughts you have on upcoming ideas.
And we're open
Right.
to ideas. So if someone
And so
watching
if someone
your
wants to
show,
call in
yes,
and
yeah,
ask
at
to
info@raceandpoint.com.
right, and they want to come on the show, and
Yeah.
so that's something that you're open to.
Absolutely,
That's great.
absolutely.
Good. And do you have the next episode scheduled? Is it on the
We're
on the
working
calendar?
with
So we're
Keenan,
gonna-
yeah,
to be announced.
We're working with him, hopefully for January.
Right, okay.
But we still actually have 2 shows that haven't been shown yet.
Right. Oh,
So
good. Okay.
I think there's only 2 or 3 that are out, and then we
Okay.
have 2 that are
That will be
that
aired.
will be coming out.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds
and
good.
They're excellent. So
Ah,
just
that's
saying.
good. So any thoughts to close out 2019 as we're at the end of the year? What would you like to tell everyone on this topic for the
Tell
end
everyone
of 2019?
To stay engaged and learn something new. Put yourself out there. I mean, even though you see it as being uncomfortable, push against it so that you can be able to enrich your life.
Right. And you, Michelle?
I agree. We can end on Lavette.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, for coming in
Thank
and
you
making
for
this
having us.
happen.
Thank you.
So this is great stuff.